Charlie Munger, Berkshire Hathaway's vice chair and Warren Buffett's longtime business partner, sounded a dire warning over inflation, calling surging prices the second biggest threat just behind a nuclear war. Perhaps one of the most familiar terms in economics is inflation. Historically, it has thrown many countries into long periods of instability. It is not uncommon for central bankers to seek the title of inflation hawk. Politicians have taken office promising to fight inflation only to lose power when they failed to do so. During Gerald Ford's presidency in 1974, inflation was even declared public enemy number one of the United States. But what exactly is inflation and why is it so important? Hello and welcome back to the Finance Guardian channel. In today's video, we'll be talking about Charlie Munger's last warning. We're flirting with serious trouble. So hit that subscribe button and the bell beside it and let's get started. Basically, inflation is the rate at which prices have increased over a period of time. It is often viewed as a broad measure which encompasses the overall increase in prices or increased living standards within a country, but it can also be measured in a narrower sense, such as the increase in prices for certain goods like foods or for services like haircuts. Regardless of the context, inflation represents how much more expensive a given set of goods and/or services has become over a certain time frame, most commonly a year. But that's really only half of the definition. Inflation can also be defined as the value of your money going down. The problem at hand is that there is a relatively high demand for goods and services but low supply due to supply chain problems, leading to higher prices. But at the same time, the Federal Reserve has been increasing the money supply through new currency printing. In fact, since February of 2020, the Fed has effectively printed $4.72 trillion. With both the dollar becoming more abundant and the supply of goods outpacing the demand, inflation has been fairly high. Inflation data for April of 2022 showed an annual inflation rate of 8.3% in the US. Inflation is projected to be at 2% per year, so obviously we've blown past that ceiling and it's now getting to the point where the Fed is going to have to step in and raise interest rates to put a brake on the economy and cool inflation down. So that is the story so far. Now, with that background in mind, let's turn to Charlie Munger and hear his take on what's going on. Charlie's recent interview marks a momentous occasion. The remarks he made rocked the financial market. Charlie Munger said, "We've, the United States, done something pretty extreme and we don't know how bad the troubles will be yet. Whether it will be like Japan or something a lot worse, I think we do know that we're flirting with serious trouble." It's intense reading those three sentences. Charlie is referencing the fact that since February of 2020, America has created more than 40% of all US dollars ever to exist. Known as money printing, this is the process of creating money out of thin air, which ultimately results in inflation. You've probably heard, and as I've mentioned earlier, that the current rate of inflation hovers near a 40-year high at 8.3%. In reality, inflation is much higher than 8.3%, but the number is easily manipulated by determining what constitutes a basket of regular goods. Naturally, it also makes sense for the inflation number to be understated so no one throws bananas at the institutions in charge run by white men more than 70 years old. Every time we fill up at the gas station or go to the supermarket, we are paying the inflation tax. When it's a small tax, we don't complain, but when it's a 7 to 15% added tax, it makes the hairs on our back stand up. Thanks to the existing finance industry using complexity, they have kept inflation as well as the operation of financial markets quiet. But not until Twitter and Reddit started translating the jargon of the men in suits. Remember that inflation decreases the value of money so you can afford less. The bizarre Japanese reference. Charlie mentions Japan in order to illustrate what can happen when governments and central banks print money recklessly. The good fortune Japan had ran out of in the 1990s. By 2001, stocks and land values plummeted by 60% and 70% respectively. Attempts at fixing the problem were made by the government and the central bank. They repurchased their own debt as well as many other common stocks. It was a time when they raised interest rates a lot and created vast amounts of money out of nowhere. It led to a period of zero economic growth, with the government owning large portions of what, by its very nature, should have been free markets. Since this economic disaster, Japan has never fully recovered. Now this is what everyone gets wrong. Japan indeed screwed up, but it's still a beautiful country. You won't find riots in the streets, there are no problems with businesses, people in the country are happy and don't kill each other partly because guns are illegal, unlike in the US. In spite of all the free money handed out, Japan did not suffer dire consequences. That's why you shouldn't believe most of the rage bait that says financial markets are doomed. History shows that countries are capable of making dumb decisions and life still continues. Charlie is adamant that we don't know what these latest financial antics will do to the United States. When the US created trillions of dollars out of thin air, it changed history forever. We learned from Japan that this experiment can continue for decades. The big question now is, are Americans going to rise up against monetary inequality, or will they stay silent like the good citizens of Japan? What we'll be talking about next is a bucket of cold water over the head, so don't wipe the sweat off your face just yet. 15% inflation was recorded in the 1970s. This led to a terrible recession that cut many people in the back. Charlie believes it'll be hard for this to happen again because politicians today have a lot more say over financial markets than they did back then, and they'll likely prevent another recession like the one in the 1970s. Phew. But hold on. The practice of printing money is dangerous. Either we step in on a landmine or we won't. Charlie went on to say, the new troubles are likely to be different than the old Japan troubles. Then he surprisingly says, we're closer to terrible, terrible trouble than we've been in the past. The trouble may still be a long way off, so supply chain issues should subside and prices should go down. It is in the Federal Reserve's interest to avoid overreacting and raising rates too fast like Japan did if the next inflation numbers are higher than 8.3%. The Fed is capable of being trigger-happy, as we saw in 2020. During the 1970s, Paul Volcker, the head of the Federal Reserve, increased interest rates to 20% in an effort to slow inflation. Many people were infuriated by the move. Even though the 1970s recession that caused havoc in the economy is behind us, Charlie has a stark warning that may jolt your mind. You may wish you had a Volcker 1970s-style recession instead of what you're going to get. Charlie says that things might be worse than they were in the 1970s. There is no exemption for the rest of the world either. Each time the US sneezes, every other country gets a cold, and most countries have printed far too much money and lowered their interest rates to zero too. There will be interest rates hikes soon, crash if they go too high, high inflation if they don't go up fast enough, followed by pissed off Americans. What this crucially means for you. Whether you invest in your money or not, you should always pay attention to the global economy. With 8.3% inflation, staying in cash can be tough. It is very likely for stock market crashes to happen. Even the financial dinosaurs like Charlie are publicly declaring that the madness cannot continue. In times like these, Charlie's mental model is to choose the least bad option. His portfolio includes 4 stocks and some properties. He says most people diversify way too much when they really all need is 4 good investments. We live in a confusing time in history. Nobody knows what will happen next. Although Japan shows that nothing could happen, a trigger-happy leadership running the financial markets increases the chances of trouble. It is a sign of the times that people with great credibility are revealing the magic trick that is money created out of thin air. And that is all the time that we have today, folks. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button. If you're new around here, subscribe to our channel to remain updated about all of our future videos. We'll see you next time.